So our sort of topic of discussion right now is ghosting, and that the topic question that we asked on the last episode was, why do men ghost? So just have at it. Give us your off the top answer to that.
Sure. Not a ton of experience with it.
I was going to ask you, do you have any experience with ghosting?
I mean, and here's the other thing, before we dive too far into it, let's define what ghosting means.
Please, yeah.
So I tried to do some research because you were like, hey, I want to talk about this. So I tried to figure it out. And there's, scientists who are trying to do like studies and figure out like, okay, what percentage of people have been ghosted. There was like a Forbes poll in an article that I read that said that 84% of, and I forget the specific demographics, but it was like 18 to 60 year olds who were single, right? 80, or maybe it wasn't 60 for this one, but like 18 to 35, 40.
Okay.
84% of them in Texas reported either having ghosted or been ghosted or both.
In Texas?
In Texas. Texas is one of the highest states.
Really?
It was tied for like 5th or 6th. Yeah. And one of the
Texas?
lowest. Yeah. And it was a lot of, like North Dakota or something random was number 1. Like in terms of percentage of people that had been or had actually ghosted.
Okay.
But then when you go look at the actual studies of like what is the emotional effect, and psychological effect of ghosting, they defined ghosting as something along the lines of the ending of a relationship by cessation of communication.
Okay.
Right? So it's like, okay, the idea that you're going to end a relationship by just totally not communicating.
Right.
And then they had this other thing that I had never heard it until I read about it this week, called breadcrumbing. Have you ever heard this expression?
No.
It's where essentially I've heard the phrase, girls use this before, oh, I've got him on the roster or something.
Yeah, yeah. That's a song.
Oh, okay. But it's the idea of you just leave a little breadcrumb. One little text that's kind of non-committal, or one comment on a social media post, just intermittently, in order to just make sure that they don't totally lose their feelings for you. Just a breadcrumb, which is essentially somewhat similar to ghosting. You're really kind of ending the relationship. You're putting it on pause at least, but you're just doing enough to not, end it permanently.
You're kind of having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah. And there was a study that I saw from 2020 where it said that ghosting didn't have significant psychological harm, but breadcrumbing did, which was super interesting. Presumably because ghosting more likely and more frequently occurs in much shorter term relationships, so it's easier to get over. Whereas breadcrumbing is something that would by definition be extended over a longer period of time. But even that definition, the cessation of a relationship or ending communication or whatever I said, that's not really specific, because what's a relationship nowadays? Like that's a whole issue in and of itself in our modern dating culture.
That is one of my super pet peeves that's now part of the dating culture, and it comes from the younger kids, to be honest. I call them kids, but the 20s-year-olds. And just all the terms, like, and the way that people try to use them to manipulate the relationship. So like, if you're like, now there's talking. That's been around for a while, that term. Like we're talking. But guys and girls will use that to stiff arm the term dating. But if you're taking me on dates, we are by definition dating. So, and then, relationship, if we are dating and we're getting to know each other and we're spending time together, that is also by definition a relationship.
Sure.
Now you might add the committed word to that.
Or exclusive.
We're in an exclusive relationship or committed relationship, or I think then that's obvious. You would have a conversation about that. But yeah, there's all these
even
words
right there,
and like, what?
I would use different terms. Like I would have a different definition of what dating is.
Yeah.
Like than what because I would describe that as going on dates versus dating. Because to me, dating means an exclusive dating relationship. That's the implication.
Okay.
That's the implication, at least, right? But I think that highlights the problem. is that nobody knows where they're at, so nobody knows what should be expected. Right? Like, if I match with someone on a dating app, what is socially appropriate in terms of responding or not responding? Right? If we've been talking for 2 days, is it ghosting if you don't respond? Or
so
like,
this is something that I tried to like distinguish on the last episode
Okay.
with Trey, was that there's like different levels of ghosting.
Sure.
So you have what I was calling short-term ghosting, which is like maybe you met on a dating app and you were texting and communicating, and then they disappeared before you ever actually went on the date that you talked about going on. Or he kept saying, I want to take you out, I want to take you out, and then was gone, disappeared. And then there's like the what I would call medium term ghosting, where maybe you were dating, going on dates for a few months, and then one day he's there, next day he's gone, ceasing communication.
Sure.
And then there's the long term ghosting, which is a more terrifying, of like you were in a committed relationship for however long,
Extended period of time. Yeah.
extended period, and they just leave or abandon. So that's something that I have said that maybe not everyone agrees with, is that to me ghosting is just like a millennial term for abandonment. It isn't, I mean, there could be different time frames on that, but that's what it is. And psychologically, it does create or trigger abandonment wounds, because whether you had been texting for a couple weeks and really liked him, or you were in love with this person, you are then triggered to think, what did I do to make this person leave me? Just
Did I
like
do
that.
something wrong? You know, like,
Right, because there's no explanation, there's no closure, there's no, well, this is what happened between us. They're just gone. So I think anybody, if you're married with kids and your husband abandoned you, of course you're going to think, what did I do? What did we do to make him leave us? So this is an important topic to me, because I think it's extremely damaging to people on the receiving
Sure.
end, guy or girl, because girls do it too, and maybe even a little bit more in a conniving way. Girls can be conniving.
Yeah. Limited time on dating apps. By that definition, I've been short-term ghosted a fair number of times.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, I'm trying to sit there and like, okay, what did I do? You know, was I just boring? Did something come up and they forget it? Like, what happened? You know?
Exactly what happened.
And so I have no clue why they're doing that. But in terms of a guy, why do guys do it? I mean, it's probably the lawyer in me, the answer is always it depends. But I think generally it's going to be like a certain category of things. One, I mean, you're going to have guys who, for lack of a better term, are players, right? And if they feel like they're looking for a sexual relationship and that's it, they're in and out,
Yeah.
And if they, guys like that, if they feel like they're not going to get that, or that's not worth it, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, then they're just going to be out of there. They're
Or
dirt
they did
bags.
get it,
Or
and then they're
they
on to
did,
the next
and then
one.
they're on to the next one. So you're never going to change guys like that. That's the outlier, right? It might be what people experience, but that's not what most guys are. Does that make sense? Like, most guys probably don't ghost, but the people who do ghost do it a ton.
Okay.
And that's with most activity, right? Most people don't murder, but the people who do it tend to do it a lot more.
Yeah.
It's just anything and everything that's a bad behavior.
So you said that you're not going to change a guy like that.
Yeah, if no girl.
Are you meaning you're not going to change a ghoster, or you're not going to change someone who is just pursuing sexual relationships?
Someone who ghosts because they're pursuing purely sexual relationships.
Okay.
I don't think that guy's got a lot of stuff internally that he needs to figure out. That's going to be what changes him, is he's got to figure it out for himself. Nothing that you're going to say in a message or a call is going to change that. He's got a long-term healing process he needs to go through.
And on a tangent,
Sure, go for it.
what's going to change that guy?
he's got to decide that he wants something different. What is going to cause that decision? I've got no clue, right?
Yeah.
I can't speak to that. I've never had that mindset. It'll probably be something pretty dramatic, because generally it takes dramatic things to change people, that deeply. But yeah, so I've got nothing there. I think a lot of guys probably ghost because they get bored.
Okay.
Like, if she's only responding with simple messages and not giving me, hey, and guys can be lame on messaging too, right? But hey, how are you doing today? How was your day? Mine was great.
Yeah.
What am I? Okay, I'm glad. Like, what do you need? Like, give me something to respond to. Even if it's not you, the girl asking a question back, tell me why it was great. And so they're going to get bored and / feel like the girl isn't interested or into it or willing to put in any effort. So if they're not willing to put in any effort, why would I?
Yeah.
I'm the one putting myself out there. That's how guys see it. So if you're not reciprocating any interest or, actual effort, I'm not going to reciprocate any effort. Now, a girl might be responding simply, in a simple message because she's unsure or she's nervous or whatever it is. So that's how a guy's going to perceive it, that she's not interested. I think another way that guys can use ghosting is to see how interested she is to gauge it. Because for me, a lot of times I feel like I'm the one who's always, at least in the initial stages, I'm always the one initiating a conversation. Right? Like, if we stop texting for a day, 99% of the time, if we're going to have a conversation, it's because I'm sending that next text message.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's
yeah. So
that's informative to me, that what you were saying, that 99% of the time, like, they don't initiate conversation.
That's how it feels.
Are you a talk on the phone person?
I would prefer to be, but most people aren't, so I have to learn to text. Does that make sense?
Okay, that's how I feel. I mean, I can talk on the phone for hours and hours and hours. I don't know. I think that's definitely an age thing. Like, I think if you were dating a younger girl, then that's not going to be her cup of tea, probably. Sure. But like, we grew up when all you had was a landline, so you either talked on the phone or you didn't talk at all.
Well, kids these days, I mean, the difference between, like, when we say we're on the phone, we use a hand signal like this. Kids nowadays, like, pretend like you're on a phone, they'll go like this, like they've got a smartphone.
Really?
Yeah. So, like, it's a totally different environment in terms of how you communicate and what you use to communicate.
Yeah. And I would say the reverse is also true, that when I've dated someone older, I'm less of a phone person than they are. Like, they think it's totally appropriate to not talk all day and then to call at 7 p.m. Hey, what's up? How was your day? But to not text or communicate throughout the day, which, once you adapt to that, is fine, as long as there's consistent, calling.
Once you know that that's their pattern or whatever it is.
Right, yeah. But obviously, the ghosting, so just not calling or not texting or whatever your preferred method of communication is the same either way, no matter which way you slice it.
Yeah, because if a guy feels like, okay, I've been talking to this girl for 2 weeks, right? But and they're sitting there like, okay, do we meet up? Do I ask to meet up? Like, this, that, and the other, trying to gauge how interested she is. Because I think generally, and this is a whole other tangent that I won't delve into, but nowadays, post-Me Too, good guys, and most guys are more scared than they used to be about being perceived as aggressors, about things that aren't aggressive. In my opinion, asking a girl on a date isn't an aggressive behavior that you should be worried about, right? But you're more worried about it now just because in the back of your mind, you Me Too, and all you've heard about is how terrible men are.
Right. Well, that's the shift that the culture has taken.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons for the podcast, because I'm like, the guys that have been like, they've just been muted. Like, if you say something that's speaking your mind, you're aggressive, or you're
a chauvinist.
What did they say? A chauvinist, or misogynist or hyper masculine or some ridiculous
Yeah.
something to where it makes you feel like you have to be really careful and you can't pursue as diligently or you can't speak up or whatever.
Or like be forward, right? I think that's the big
Yes.
thing is guys feel like they can't be forward, or that they shouldn't be forward. But then you've got that's how guys are feeling. And so one of the ways that you can try and, because guys are not clever when it comes to, you mentioned girls are conniving. We're not as good at that naturally, right? We're just not. That's not how we're wired. And so it's like, okay, male brain, how do I figure out if she likes me? Well, if she likes me and I don't reach, and I'm not talking to her, eventually she would reach out to me, right? That's the male brain thought.
Okay.
Well, and if she doesn't ever reach out to me, and we've been talking for 2 weeks and she never even checks in, even with okay, I guess we're over, what happened, right? She just was waiting for well, clearly she wasn't that interested. Because if she was actually interested or actually cared about the possibility of a relationship, she would have reached out.
Okay, so let me give you an example then.
Sure.
So if you're, we'll say dating, you've been
Sure.
going on dates for, let's say, 2.5 months.
How many dates is that? Because I think that's more important than the time frame. Does that make sense?
Maybe you've been on
4 or 5 days. Oh, 10 dates? Okay.
Dates are like days where you hung out.
Sure.
You went to a baseball game, whatever. And then let's say he ghosts her. And let's say said guy was feeling like you were describing of like, well, I'm going to ghost her to see if she really cares about me, if she really likes me. And so girl is pissed off that he ghosted. So I'm not going to reach out to him.
Sure.
Because he's obviously an and so now he feels like, well, she didn't really like me because she's not reaching out.
Yeah.
She must not care that much.
2 ships passing in the night. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not you're applying what you're thinking to the other person, you know? Well, and I can't necessarily relate to that. Maybe I'm an odd bird and old fashioned. 10 dates, if I've been on a date with someone 10 times, I would expect to be exclusive at that point. Mm-hmm. Right? Like once we're getting past like date 5 or 6, if we're not exclusive, then this isn't working.
So then would you say once you're exclusive that like ghosting really wouldn't be something you would do anymore?
I would think, and I think the research generally backs this up, that once you're exclusive with someone, the likelihood of ghosting is significantly less. Because presumably you've had that conversation that, hey, we're going to be in an exclusive relationship, whatever you want to label it as.
We're not seeing other people.
We're not seeing other people. We're officially dating, whatever title you want to use.
That's so annoying.
I
Why do we
know.
need these things?
But it's the world we live in. And
Yeah.
so, but you've had the conversation because that's what's important. And once you've had the conversation, then the guy actually realizes she does care, right? If she's going to commit to being in an exclusive relationship, well, obviously she cares about you and she cares about y'all. So that rationale, which I think is probably a predominant one, it goes out the window. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a big one. And I think ghosting is more prominent because people are taking longer and longer now to get into committed exclusive relationships. Everyone's heard the term situationship, all this kind of stuff. And there's so many people who...
What did Jada Smith say?
Oh, I don't know.
She made up a word that became real popular. It wasn't situationship, but she said we were entangled. We were in an entanglement.
Oh yeah, when she described sleeping with her son's friend.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, while she's married to Will.
It sounds like the sheets were entangled, but that's a different thing. But because people are taking so long, the prominence of ghosting and things like that, I think, go up, more and more. And something that we mentioned in our conversation, initially and all that kind of stuff is people just aren't clearly communicating up front. Mm-hmm. People are not having the direct conversations. Guys aren't initiating it. And I don't think girls are asking for it, right? Or demanding that there be a clear conversation.
Who do you think should initiate that?
Ideally, a guy should.
Is it wrong if the girl does? Is that, or not wrong, but is that a bad idea for her to do that?
I think there are better ways for a girl to imply or initiate the conversation. Like, there's some good ways, there's some bad ways.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Give us some examples.
I've never been on this. I'm a super upfront, blunt guy, so I'm trying to put myself in a situation.
So let's just say, like, you've been seeing somebody and you haven't brought that up yet about.
I, the guy, haven't brought it up, like what we're doing,
right,
where we're
you
at.
haven't brought up what are we, and she brings it up.
Sure.
And essentially says, what are we? And maybe she puts out there that I'm not seeing anybody else. I've already chosen to do that.
I think if I'm the girl and I am going on dates with a guy who hasn't brought it up, then you probably shouldn't lead with or include that in the initial part that I'm not seeing other people.
Okay.
Because you might scare him away.
Why?
Because, oh, whoa, okay, you're not seeing other people. You've already made a decision for us. You're telling me that you've decided that we are not seeing other people. That's not what you said, but that's how the guy's going to perceive it.
Really?
Yes. Right.
That's annoying.
So.
Because I would think, from a girl's perspective, I think most girls would agree that I'm showing you that I really
you're being
like
vulnerable.
you.
I get what you're saying.
I'm showing you that I have considered my options and I chose you, and I'm telling you, hey, I'm letting you know that I'm not seeing anybody else because I just want to spend time with you. So what do you think about that? And the fact that might scare him off is a little weird.
Let me play a little
but
devil's.
I don't think you're wrong. I agree with you.
Let me play a
I'm
little
just telling
devil's
you.
advocate here.
Okay.
From your perspective, what you're doing is you're trying to be vulnerable.
Yes.
What I'm hearing in that is, hey, I've thought about it and I've decided, right? It sounds to me like the girl is trying to lead that relationship. And she's trying to start off the relationship by being the leader. And guys are dumb and slow and sometimes need prodding, sure. But there are better ways to do it, right? When you think about old school dating, how did people know that they were interested in each other when, they talked even less frankly than we do nowadays? They didn't have apps. I'm sure you've heard the story about a girl would drop a handkerchief very intentionally so that, she'd be walking in front of a guy that she wanted to be, or would be willing to talk to. She'd drop the handkerchiefs to give the guy an opportunity to then initiate the conversation with her.
Yeah.
So if you start the actual conversation with, hey, I'm not seeing anyone else, or I'm ready to not see anyone else, that's not you dropping the handkerchief. That's you saying, oh, thanks for handing me my own handkerchief that I never dropped. By the way, we're talking now. And that's going to scare a guy off, because instinctively in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is the start of a dating relationship. What's it going to be like in marriage? Is she going to ever let me lead? Is she going to make all of my decisions for me, right? Am I going to be able to choose what I have for lunch, right? Is that rational for guys to think? No, but that's where we go to.
Yeah.
So.
And I would assume it's kind of like you said earlier, where it's not really like a dialogue. It's just
No.
just happens.
Guys are simple. We don't have that internal dialogue.
Okay.
We're.
So you just hear that and you go, no.
You just instinctively are like, alarm bells are going off.
Yeah.
But that's kind of why the alarm bells are going off, is because it'll put you in a fight or flight situation, like 100%. Like, that's immediately where your adrenals go, is you're standoffish, which is the exact opposite of what you're trying to, right? The last thing you want a guy to feel in that situation is standoffish, because you're trying to tell him, I don't want you to stand off over here. I want to, stand together exclusively. And so a better way to do that is to be like, hey, let's say you met on an app. Hey, I know, we're meeting on the app. We've been on X number of dates. Everyone's got different timelines for, when they go exclusive, this, that, or the other. What are your thoughts about all of that and what that looks like and what the timing is? Now, I think it's best if the guy hasn't brought it up by second or third date. That's a great, it's second or third date. One of those first 3 dates is going to essentially be an interview date, where you're going through the list of questions. You're trying to make sure they're not a serial killer. What are their values? Yada, 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 right? That's a great thing to put up front, so that way in the back of your mind. And if it gets to that point, let's say a guy says, hey, 6 dates, 2 months, whatever it is. and then it gets to that point, then you can bring it up and be like, hey, just FYI, I know we kind of talked about it. You said like, this is kind of roughly the time frame. So what are you thinking? Then that way you're not the one starting the conversation. You're just continuing one you already had. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It definitely makes sense.
Here's what the counter to that I'm hearing someone say is, Josh, that's going to scare off the guy in the second or third date.
Yeah.
And if it scares off the guy in the second or the third date, that's not the guy you want to be dating.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts.
Yeah, because he's trying to avoid commitment.
Or maybe he's not actively trying to, but he's not ready for it.
Yeah.
Or he doesn't know what he wants.
Yeah. I think that is probably another factor that keeps good potential couples from getting to that committed relationship phase, because nobody wants to bring it up. Because no female wants to do that. Mm-mm. No, and we're told not to do that because it'll scare them off. We're told don't ask what are we. Like that's like that makes us just one giant red flag if we ask what are we. But that's not fair. That's especially if you're sleeping together, if you're being taken on dates, if you're meeting each other's friends, like you're letting somebody into your world. So you have every right to ask, are you doing this with other people too? And to have an expectation and have a choice of, do I want to be with this person that's still exploring their options when I'm not? So we don't want to bring it up because if you really like him, you don't want to scare him off. But it's also kind of not fair that asking that question is, according to society, going to scare him off.
It feels
the
like
problem is, why is he not bringing it up?
Here's what I'm hearing you say, so tell me if I've got it. It doesn't feel fair because it feels like you have to give and all the power is taken away from you, essentially.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because you just have to keep waiting.
Yeah. You have no power to have that conversation, because if you try to control it whatsoever, then you're told it's 100% going to backfire.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, okay, 100% it doesn't work.
Or it does
maybe,
backfire. You've had it backfire.
Or maybe he might bring it up eventually. We might get there. But that's the only way that there's a potential for the future.
Right. And then if he knows that he has that power and he's maybe not the greatest guy, or he's a guy who wants to have all his options open or not ready for commitment or whatever.
Sure.
Then, I mean, he's just going to milk that.
100%. Yeah, there's going to be bad actors. Guys are 100% going to milk that.
And so then
that's not the majority of guys.
Waiting and waiting and waiting. When do I draw the line and decide, okay, he's a bad actor?
Yeah, I can't tell you where to draw the line. I mean, I have such a different perspective than what the modern culture is. Mm-hmm. You know, like to me, the idea of sleeping with someone before marriage, that's not on the table, right?
Sure.
So,
which biblically is correct.
Yes.
But that's not what
that's
most
not what's
people are
happening
doing.
in most, even in people who call themselves Christians. That's not what's actually happening.
Right.
So I totally get how, like, on the whole, people feel like they just have to be so vulnerable, but they have no ability to see where they're at. And so it's like you have to give with absolutely no ability to see where you're at. And that's why I think before you get to the point where you're very vulnerable, you're 2 or 3 months in, if you brought it up in the second or third date, like, hey, we don't have to make the decision now, but when are we making the decision? You just kind of casually mention it, like, hey, I know we're met on an app, there's no pretense of exclusivity, this, that, and the other, but like, you know, what are your thoughts on, you know, what that looks like? Right? Because most of the time on the profile, it's going to say interested in short term, which if a guy's putting that, you should know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
Or if he says long term or life partner, whatever the term is, then you can say, hey, I saw in your profile you said this. What are your thoughts on, you know, timing for that? You know, like just so I can know, like no pressure, it's not now, I know that. But what are your thoughts on the timing, you know? And if a guy isn't able to have a real response to that, and his real response might be, you know what, honestly, I don't know right now. And that's a totally reasonable thing. A guy's probably not.
Even a reasonable response from him might be, I don't know right now, but I will tell you.
I will tell
will
you.
let you know.
Yeah, and then in that instance, you can be like, that's totally fair. By the way, for me, I've got a personal boundary, and that boundary is, X number of months, X number of dates, whatever it looks like. Just so you know, right? Like, we can have the conversation whenever you're ready, but that's my personal boundary.
Yeah.
That is a lot less intimidating to a guy and a lot less likely to make them run off. I mean, it still might make them run off. It's not a no risk, course of action. But I think you should feel better if you take that approach and they are totally, scared away by it and be like, okay, well, you can't have an emotionally mature conversation. You're not ready for this.
Right.
Why are we doing this?
So that's what I was going to say is in comes the ghosting. When you have a second or third date and maybe you're setting expectations or setting boundaries or asking, what do you think about when should we be exclusive? And he might give you an answer. He might say,
on the date,
I want to be exclusive today. And then tomorrow you never hear from him again.
Sure.
So now we're back to like the emotional immaturity of the guy, which is, or we'll say of the ghoster, because
Sure.
this could be going both ways.
Sure.
Something that I wonder is that person who's ghosting, whether it be that scenario or anything else, what is it that they're running from? So, like, if that conversation scares them off, what are you scared of?
As a guy, you probably don't know how to put words on it, and you're not actively thinking, what am I scared of? Right? I mean, that's the way guys are, we do not have those thoughts, right? But what they're probably scared of is, the general term for it would be commitment. But that can take a lot of different forms, right? Someone in my position, you can be scared of being hurt again, feeling like you're being taken advantage of again. Maybe a younger guy, I'm scared because he doesn't feel like he's in a position to be able to provide, right? So he's like, oh my goodness, she's already asking me to do this and commit. Like, I've got a low-level job, like I'm not in a position where I could do this. So that's probably what's going on in their mind. But I can promise you the guy's not actively thinking, oh, this is what I'm scared of, and I'm running away. It's like, no. The way that a guy would explain it to another guy is, bro, super clingy.
Really?
Yeah. And that would be the end of the conversation, right? Super clingy. She asked where we were at. It was second or third date. And then the response would be, oh yeah, super clingy. Get away from that one, right? And then they go back to Fortnite or whatever it was. And so if that's the response that a guy is going to have, I mean, I can't tell you, I can't help females feel better about being ghosted, but like, I know if, hey, I had a reasonable conversation. Now, sometimes females don't come across the way that they think they do.
Yeah.
Same with males.
Yeah.
But if you actually did, like, truly kind of subtly try and bring it up and they run, you didn't want that guy anyways. You might think that you did in the moment, and that's fine to hurt, but you should know in the back of your mind, and hopefully it helps you get over it quicker, he wasn't ready for a long-term committed relationship. He's not in a spot where he's ready for it or capable of being there emotionally, so you dodged a bigger bullet.
Yeah.
You got nicked, but you missed, he didn't hit you with a kill shot.
Yeah. So most likely the answer is that he's afraid of commitment, but maybe for various reasons.
Any number of reasons. And most of them, if you're talking about good guys are going to convince themselves that it's for a noble reason. Guys think they're not committing because they're doing the right thing. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the catch-22 is that they do want commitment. That's what all of us want.
Sure.
The large majority of people want to be with one person and want marriage and family.
100%.
So, and I think that we all do this at different points or in different situations to like convince yourself that you're avoiding that commitment with that person for a good reason. but that may not necessarily be true.
It all stems down to poor communication and emotional immaturity. And guys need to be better at that. And sorry, we're at where we're at, ladies. You know, like, you want to help the dating pool?
Yeah.
Encourage dads to be better dads and teach their sons how to have emotional conversations. Encourage dads to stick around. If you're split up, make sure that your kids have an opportunity to see their dad and have have a father figure in their life who hopefully would be willing to pour in and teach some of those things to make the guys emotionally mature at a younger age.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we'll go back to the example of a dominant thing, right? Here's a guy's perspective. She brings up, oh, when are we going to go exclusive, right? A young guy, 24 years old, making $65K a year, doesn't feel like he's where he needs to be, right, financially, in order to be able to provide. He's going on a date with someone who's, maybe she didn't go to college, she's got her own business, doing super well, making good money. So she would fit that dominant category we were talking about earlier. All of a sudden, he's like, okay, I can't provide. This girl's going to hold me accountable, but she doesn't know how to hold me accountable, so all she's going to do is nag and yell at me, and I'm not there right now, so I'm just going to avoid the situation altogether. That'll be the least emotionally traumatic thing for everyone involved. So I'm just going to back off. Yeah, it's going to hurt me a little bit. I'll just ignore it until it goes away. It'll hurt her a little bit, but it'll hurt her a lot less than if we were to get into a relationship. She was to nag me, then I was to feel insecure, then we'd spiral down and have a bad relationship, 8 months later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what a guy's like, that's the thought process. Not that it's healthy or what it should be, but that's where we're at.
Yeah. So how do we fix that?
Well, there's macro issues going on that we're not going to be able to fix. You and I can't fix.
Is that situation right there that you just described repairable? Is that, if he's thinking that, is there anything that she can do to stop it and turn it back around?
It depends on the guy's level of emotional intelligence and maturity. It depends where he's at on the spectrum.
Because I'll tell you, a guy who is ghosting, so if she feels like she scared him off, or maybe she's even sensing that was happening, that he's feeling insecure, so he's backpedaling. If she really likes him, she's gonna try to make him feel unafraid. So whatever that looks like for her. So
Wait,
some people might go crazy.
Okay.
And she might blow up his phone. She might show up at his house. She might cry. She might tell him she loves him. Some people might be a little more reasonable. They might be reaching out. They might send one long text that says like, whatever you're going through, I want to support you. They're going to try to grasp at straws to try to reel him back in and make him feel safe.
Sure.
Does that ever work? In my experience, no. I'm tainted that that's a him problem. But I don't know that that's true.
It probably,
because if it is a him problem, then that would be us saying the way we fix it is him. That it's all the guys, that we can't do anything to facilitate healing that aspect of the dating culture. But that would be hard for me to accept. That there's nothing that we can do on our end.
I think it probably depends on how you go about it. You show up at his door crying. Yeah, no, that's
now that I've never done.
Sure, but like that's a 0% chance of working. You know what I mean? Super long text message, probably also a lesser. Hey, I'm sensing we're getting emotionally distant. Is there something going on? If so, I'd love to talk about it. That's all you have to say. Right? And if he doesn't respond to that, he's not worth it.
If he doesn't respond to that, it's a him problem.
It's a him problem. And there's no fixing it, Yeah. And that's not magic language. I just came up with that. But that's the idea. You send 2 long, massive text messages. A guy is going to say, okay, well, when things get hard, she goes crazy. That's what a guy's instinct is going to be.
Yeah.
So send a...
And even that right there, maybe that's accurate, that she does go crazy. Because like you were saying earlier, there's a lot of issues. People have been burned. People have had bad experiences. Their parents are divorced, this and that. And so, like for me personally, someone pulling away does kind of make me go crazy in that it's that anxious attachment of like, I don't want to be abandoned, so how can I control the situation?
Yeah.
And I don't say anybody who's that way, it's not your fault, but that's the reality of a lot of people nowadays. And I think something like that, the anxious person needs to work on that and be more self-aware and reel it in, shorten the text or whatever. But the person that is becoming distant also needs to reel it in and realize like what's happening, that she's not going crazy or he's not going crazy. That person just cares about you and wants the relationship to succeed. So instead of just, she's super clingy, she's going crazy, I'm just gonna ghost her, you know, there comes the emotional maturity aspect of like, okay, well, let's calm down and what's really going on here? And do I want this? Do you want this? Yes and yes. Okay, so how do we get on the same page and make this ship sail? But nobody's doing that.
No, nobody's doing that.
Then you get on Instagram and you scroll and everything's saying men ain't shit, just everybody sucks, women are crazy, like just go out and do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a crazy world, and people are acting all sorts of, ways that are non-productive. But
Yeah.
like,
But
if a
this
girl,
is just like the spiral.
sure,
I think.
it 100% is a
Super
spiral.
common.
And I think from a guy's perspective, right? You mentioned something there that I don't think a lot of females in that situation would realize is that they are potentially, when they show up, at the house in the middle of the night or send a bunch of text messages and stuff like that, is they're letting their anxiety from their past traumas or bad experiences pour out in a way that is going to create a real negative perception for the guy, right? And if that's the only thing a guy has to go on, then that's not going to reflect well on them, right? It's going to reflect poorly, and so it's going to raise an even bigger red flag when they're trying to, grasp at the straws.
Yeah.
Generally, females might not be aware that that's what's happening, right? And how that's going to be perceived. And then they're also not giving guys the benefit of the doubt. 48 hours is not ghosting, you know. I'd stand by that 100%. If after 48, 72 hours you want to send a little check-in text message or, whatever, it's short, it's not super long, that's fine. After that, maybe give it a week. And then after that, then you could consider it ghosting, you know, but life happens.
And I will say that is hard. I mean, if you're in the middle of that situation, especially if you're really invested in the relationship, that's a hard thing to do, to like hold yourself back and to try to like be present in the moment and think logically and what should I say that's gonna, still give him space and not feel like I'm bombarding him, or her if the roles are reversed. So I give people that grace because we're all imperfect.
100%.
But it is important to give the benefit of the doubt on both sides. So if one person is bombarding and acting crazy or sending too long of text messages, the other party needs to understand that they're not a crazy person. They're just hurting or scared or missing that person or trying to show you that they care. And if someone needs space, they also deserve the benefit of the doubt that 2 days isn't ghosting.
Yeah. Yeah. And
even if they didn't express that, there's probably something going on emotionally or circumstantially that is in the way.
It's a tough line to draw, right? Because let's, in our hypothetical, girl sending a bunch of text messages because she's hurt, right? Like, 10 right after another. She's calling like 5 times in a row. Why aren't you answering? Well, she's hurt. So you want to give the benefit of the doubt, but at some point it shows that they're not there, like they don't have the emotional maturity that a guy would be looking for, right? Or that the female should ideally have to be in a healthy relationship. And if a guy needs too much time too frequently, away, then they're not. But you also got to balance that with the benefit of the doubt, which is it's what makes giving advice tough, because it's not a one size fits all solution.
Yeah. I think that's one of the hardest things to navigate nowadays, and especially in the early stages of dating, because you don't know that person
Yeah.
yet. So you don't know why they're being distant. You can assume or like try to make
Logical inferences, like,
yeah, or try to look at it positively, try to see the half glass full of like, oh yeah, they're just going through something, they just need space, I should be supportive, I should keep that door open.
or
But
look at
what
him, he's working
you
hard.
could be totally
Yeah.
wrong. That
Yeah.
he could already be out with another girl.
Sure.
He could have been out with her last night, and that's why he's being distant today. So it's really hard. It's hard to not become jaded and to continue to see that glass half full when things do get rocky.
Yeah, I get that.
What do you think the Bible says about ghosting / abandonment, which it's not going to directly tell us, but we hold the Bible as the golden standard for what's right and wrong, and most people have that same moral compass of
General Judeo-Christian values.
yes, the
Yeah.
10 Commandments, and I think most people would agree that ghosting is not the right thing to do. So what does the Bible say about that?
So, yeah, you mentioned the Bible doesn't have much that's directly applicable to modern dating, but the thing that comes to my mind is kind of the idea that we see throughout Scripture, which is treat others how you want to be treated. Golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself. All sorts of verses that you could quote on that. It's like, okay, do I want to be ghosted? No. So I probably shouldn't ghost.
Yeah.
Do I want to be, bombarded with 47 text messages? No, so I probably shouldn't do that. Do I want someone, when I was in an emotional situation, screenshotting a text message and then posting it on the internet saying all these bad things? No, I wouldn't want that. So why am I going to do that? There's, and so yeah, ghosting is bad and people shouldn't do it. Because that's not how they would want to be treated. I think that's the biblical perspective.
Yeah. I think that it's very unloving. So you're talking about loving your neighbor as yourself. So not only treating others the way you want to be treated, but loving someone is not letting them be hurt when you know that you're the one hurting them and doing nothing about it. Like you're just, you know that you could help by providing closure or a conversation, and you're actively choosing to not do that and to make the pain worse.
Yeah.
By just doing nothing.
Yeah, I've got two different strains of thought on that. One, I think I totally agree with that. It's not loving. And that goes against something I think we see in society a lot today, which is, love is acceptance, right? Love, if you love someone, you've got to accept them.
You enable them.
Right, yeah. Love is acceptance to the point of enabling, right? Oh, I love myself because I was born this way where I'm a narcissist. No, that's not that's an extreme example, but if you love someone, you want what's best for them. You want them to be the best version of themselves.
Right.
Right? So a loving thing to do, if someone, has a red flag that pops up that you're like, you know what, I as a guy am no longer interested because you told me X, or I found out, this thing, or we don't share this in common. The loving thing, right, would be to explain like, hey, I really appreciated having this conversation. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So, and you can end it there. And that's one that's better than nothing, right? That's loving. But if a guy says, hey, here's why, because sometimes people want to know why, both girls and guys, what they're trying to do is, in a guy explains it. I feel like I've seen some threads online where girls are like, well, this is what he said as to why, can you believe this? Why would a guy ever say it? It's like, okay, well, don't bag him for trying to help you.
Yeah.
He's probably doing it imperfectly, but he's trying to be loving towards you by explaining.
Being honest.
By being honest and providing feedback, because how else are we supposed to grow?
Right. That's definitely an unpopular opinion because, I think it is, because I'm a very honest person in my Sagittarius nature. Just blunt, honest.
Sure.
If someone asks me, do I look good in this outfit? If it's my best friend and it's her engagement party and she looks awful, I know it's not going to photograph well, it's not her color, it's not right for the lighting. I'm going to tell her, no, that's not a good choice.
Or she doesn't know she's being engaged and she's, oh, should I wear this? You know,
yeah, or not getting proposed to or whatever. But a lot of people would perceive that as being rude. And I think that could be one of the reasons why people aren't honest about like ending a relationship. And no matter what the reasoning is, they might see the honest truth as being rude. Or even a friendship.
Yeah. And yeah, that's why I think sometimes, I think I mentioned earlier that guys can sometimes see ghosting as the honorable way to do it because, well, if I tell her, you know, she said X, Y, and Z, which it comes across as crazy, it's going to help nobody. I'm only going to get myself in trouble because that screenshot might end up on the internet.
Yeah.
You know,
true,
like
yeah.
I'm going to have a lot less backlash if I just don't say anything.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, that's the whole, okay, well, if you want honest feedback, you want growth, and you want communication, you can't shut it down when it happens, even if it doesn't happen perfectly.
I think going along with the unloving is like not being self-serving. So if you're ghosting someone because you want to avoid someone being upset with you, that's very self-serving. If you're lashing out at someone who's trying to honestly end things with you and screenshotting stuff or blasting them on the internet, that's self-serving.
Yeah.
You should honor that that person doesn't want that relationship and that they're being honest about why. A lot of dating culture is all about me, me, me. So that avoidance is probably ending relationships that don't even need to be ended. Because if you could just come together and have a conversation, maybe that guy who's thinking this relationship isn't going to work out because what I'm seeing in her, so I'm just going to bounce and not talk about it. Had they maybe just had a conversation, it could have just been a misunderstanding. Or maybe that person who overreacted would have apologized and been like, you know, I shouldn't have done that. I want to work on this. But instead, nobody said anything, and that relationship just fell to the wayside.
Yeah.
Something that could have been really good, potentially.
And I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier with the vulnerability. Because both guys and girls in that situation, no one's willing to be the vulnerable one first.
Yeah.
You know, if you feel like you're being ghosted, you don't want to send that message, you know, following up or checking in because you feel like it'll just create more hurt.
Yeah.
Right. But you're never going to know what could have been unless you tried.
Yeah. What is it that's going on with people, but specifically talking about single guys, that's causing them to be so cowardly? Because truly, ghosting somebody is a cowardly thing to do. I mean, you're avoiding that confrontation because it doesn't have to be ugly if you are wanting to end it, or if you did have a disagreement, or even if you need to fight, if you need to have a fight. But just walking away without saying anything, I think is a cowardly thing to do. It's not courageous.
I agree with that. Why are guys being cowards? I mean, I would agree that guys generally are more cowardly, not just ghosting, but than they have been in prior generations and prior times. I think it's a lot of things. I mean, we know testosterone levels of the population are significantly lower than they used to be.
Yeah.
I'm not a scientist, couldn't tell you why.
I could tell you why, but that's another episode.
Yeah, a bunch of people have a bunch of theories, and it's probably all partially related. Right?
Yeah.
For me, I think some of it has to do with the reaction to the Me Too movement. I mean, you see that Pew Research poll, and I think it's something like 70% of males, this was in 2020, maybe late 2019, 70% of males feel like dating is harder in the past 10 decades.
Yeah.
In large part due to Me Too. And so what you've done with the Me Too, because it needed to happen in some respect. Certain people were being terrible. It needed to be called out and addressed and fixed. But what you've done is you've made everyone who wasn't doing those things so terrified that someone might say they were doing those things, that a guy is now scared to do anything.
Yeah.
So you've effectively neutered men, because they'd rather be cowardly and be called out for that than be accused of doing something much worse.
Yeah. I think it can also be that for some people, it's easier. Something that we discussed in the last episode was that it's kind of like pick your hard.
Sure.
You know, because I that to me is totally, to ghost somebody is way harder. Like, I can't sleep at night. Just knowing that.
Like if you were the ghoster?
If I was the ghoster.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think some people can just suppress that. They can stifle that, and they know that after a couple of nights of not sleeping, it'll go away. So maybe for them, that's the easier path to take than confrontation, because a lot of people aren't comfortable with that.
I think for guys especially. I mean, guys are phenomenal at compartmentalizing emotions and not dealing with them.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what we're taught to do with emotions.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
That's what you know.
that's the easiest thing in the world, is to avoid something emotional for a guy. So if you give him an excuse to, and he's looking to, it's just the easiest route.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the saying that, like, guys have a waffle brain?
Oh, yeah.
Waffle and spaghetti?
Yep. You can just stay right in the little,
Yes, guys'
pocket.
brains are built like a waffle, so everything's compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Nothing overlaps. Nothing's complicated. It's very laid out very simply. But women have a spaghetti brain where, like, you try to unravel a pot of spaghetti, you'll never.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all interconnected. It's all related.
Yeah, it's very messy. Mm-hmm. So that makes relationships hard in general, but that communication piece that leads to the ghosting, I think that's part of the issue, is that guys aren't thinking like a spaghetti and women aren't thinking like a waffle.
Yeah. And also, like, I don't think most guys are naturally ever going to think like a spaghetti.
Right.
But
it's the empathy.
They don't even appreciate that what could possibly be going on in the woman's mind. The guy's like, well, I said this, it means that, and only that, right? Like.
But then we're still like, but what do you mean?
Yeah, but it could also mean this. Like, oh, sorry, can't go out tonight. That's all the guy means, is I can't do it tonight. Mm-hmm. He's not saying he doesn't ever want to go out.
Yeah.
And the girl's like, oh my gosh, he can't go out tonight. He's never going to, he doesn't like me. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And the guy's sitting there working his late shift or whatever, not realizing that the girl has made this into a much bigger issue than he just didn't want to bore her with the story of his boss yelling at him to work late tonight.
Yeah.
He's oh, sorry, can't do it tonight.
And then she goes off, and then in comes the ghosting.
Yeah.
Because she's crazy.
She's made up a story in his mind because she doesn't appreciate that he's just literally, that's all he means, right?
Yeah.
He's in that one little box. So she develops a story because she understandably feels like she doesn't have the full story yet. Mm-hmm. And so she creates a story, responds to the story, which invariably isn't exactly what happened.
Right.
So then the guy feels like she's crazy because she's responding to a story that never happened, mm-hmm. that she made up because she felt like she had to.
So any guy, I'm just going to say this straight up, any guy who thinks that that woman is crazy who made up that story and got upset about it and went off on him or whatever, and then it's like, she's crazy, I'm going to find somebody else, you're going to be alone for a while. Because yes, some women are going to be more regulated than others, but we're all that way. We're emotional, and that's the way we think, is like a spaghetti. So of course, but trying to be more rational and regulated is a good thing on our part, mm-hmm. but guys have to understand that that's who we are, not who she is. That everything's complicated and emotional, and we need validation to feel safe, and communication, which we'll have a whole episode on communication for sure. But
I'm sure
that's just a tidbit that plays into the ghosting.
Guys do need to know that. Women also need to know that guys don't think like that.
Right.
No, you get someone who's been in enough relationships or a long-term successful marriage, they're going to realize that. But if you're dealing with a 24-year-old guy, 24-year-old Joshua did not appreciate that. You could have told it to me and I'd been like, yeah, no, I get that. But in practice, did not appreciate it. Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting there making up a story because you want validation, it would have been a lot easier if you just been like, hey, I'm really worried about why, or I made up a story or something, which is not always easy because some guys, I would appreciate that as a guy because I'm really blunt and I would appreciate that you're being vulnerable. At least I'd like to think so. But like, a guy's not going to realize that. That's not how we're wired. So yes, guys need to do better, but also girls, if you go off and crazy, like from a guy's perspective, it might help to explain why.
Yeah.
You know, if you realize, oh crap, I sent him 10 text messages last night.
Yeah.
Apologize for, you know, the overreaction. You don't have to apologize for the way that you feel, but apologize for the way that that was inappropriately expressed, and help the guy understand why you got to that point. Because he doesn't understand how his simple message led to this snowball effect.
I completely agree. And I think that if he isn't willing to be empathetic when you explain why, and to listen and try to meet you there, then he's not the right guy.
Yeah,
he's not ready for a relationship.
Yeah.
Because if he thinks that that's too much work, then how's he going to survive in a marriage?
Yeah, there's no way. If he can't work through that, it's not going to work in the long term when you're dealing with the bigger issues.
Just as a main closing note on the ghosting, what do you think is the most impactful thing that we can do, both men and women, to reverse this in the dating culture?
It's a good question. The first idea that pops into my mind might increase the really short-term ghosting, but it's going to decrease the mid and long-term ghosting.
Okay.
Which is going to be to have more clear, upfront conversations about things like expectations and needs and wants.
Yeah, and you're not the first one to say that.
Yeah, and that's going to scare some guys away. And also, we talked about it earlier, there's a way to bring it up that intimidates a guy less. Mm-hmm. So but admittedly, that might increase short-term ghosting, really short-term stuff. Yeah. But I think it decreases the possibility of you've been dating for 2 months and then he ghosts. I think another one practically is be realistic about the time frame and give more time than you realize. You might not actually be being ghosted.
Yeah.
Or at least intentionally ghosted. Mm-hmm. Also, mentioned this earlier, guys might be testing you. Should they? No, a guy shouldn't test you, right? That's not a fair thing, and a girl shouldn't test a guy like that. That doesn't indicate that someone has a healthy sense of trust. Mm-hmm. But it happens. So if you feel like you're being ghosted and you're like, but he's a guy, so he should make the first move, or he should instigate this, that, and the other. Okay, well, if you actually care, then get off your high horse and send a text, send a call, you know. Something. Yeah. Reach out. Because if you never reach out, then you didn't, from my perspective, you didn't actually care that much.
Yeah. Or you're extremely prideful. You either didn't care or you have a lot of pride.
In which case, that pride probably means if you were self-aware enough and you looked into it, you care a lot more about yourself than you do him.
Yeah. That's good. I think those are really spot on. I wrote down a quote that I saw online. Most men are not running away from great women. They're running away from parts of themselves that they're not willing to fix to deserve her. And I thought that was really insightful when it comes to ghosting, that's maybe most isn't the right way to start that statement. Maybe some men are not running away from great women. But I think that can be encouraging to just anyone who's been ghosted in general, the ghostee, because like I said in the beginning, when you feel abandoned, your instinct is going to be to blame yourself.
Sure.
But I think generally speaking, people treat other people as a reflection of the way they think of themselves. So if I'm running from someone in a very cold, unloving, cowardly way, I think that there's something very, it's a heart issue. There's a lack of love within myself. You know, if I can't love another human being right, then, you know, that's a heart problem. That's a me problem.
If I can't love myself, how am I going to love someone else? Yeah. So if a guy's got a lot of stuff that he's dealing with,
right,
then it's going to be significantly harder for him to love a girl properly.
Yeah. And as it says, they're running away from parts of themselves that they're not willing to fix to deserve her. So if I'm in a relationship and I have this heart issue and I'm feeling insecure and I realize or I think that she's too good for me because of the lack of love I have for myself, then it's easier to just leave rather than to fix my issues so that I can then feel that I'm deserving of her.
I totally agree with everything you say, but I have two things I want to push back on that quote on.
Okay.
One, this will sound harsher than I mean it. I feel like in society today, the tendency is to tell all women that all women are great, right? So it said,
Yes.
guys don't run away from great women because, and it continued on. Okay, just because someone is a woman doesn't mean that they are a great woman. Now, I agree with the quote. If a guy is running away from a great woman,
Yeah.
it probably has to do more with him, right?
Yeah.
But
A woman could read that who's not great, who has a lot of issues.
and just say, oh, well, it's not about me. It's not about me. And it's like, no. Women, guys have got a lot of crap over the past 5 years for not self-reflecting and improving. Deservedly, in a lot of ways. Women also need to do that too in modern society.
Definitely.
And then the last thing I'll push back on is deserve. That is a terrible mindset to have in a relationship. Nobody deserves one another. As Christians, we believe we all deserve death.
Yeah.
So if the mentality is, well, he has to act right or not act wrong to deserve me or to earn me or to be worthy of my, being in a relationship with him, you're doomed to fail. If that is your mentality, I would guess with a high degree of certainty, I'd bet a lot of money that whatever relationship you're in isn't going to work until that mentality changes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe a better word or phrase than deserve is like to be an equal with her, to be equally yoked with her. If you have issues that you need to fix, but you're not willing to be an equal, to be a partner to her.
Yeah, 100%. You need to be equally yoked. But the two people who are equally yoked don't deserve one another. They're just able to relate and support each other because they are in similar situations.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so something that I'm asking every guest.
Go for it.
What is something that you regret or would do differently in your dating history?
Goodness. I think that it took me way too long to realize that it wasn't about winning arguments. I like to be right. I'm an attorney. I get paid to do things correctly and perfectly.
Yeah.
It's called malpractice if you don't. And so I was raised, background to seek perfection. And that it should not be the goal in any and all communication and fights in a relationship. The goal is the improvement of the relationship.
Yeah.
And it took me a long, long time, longer than I wish it had. And it caused a lot more harm for me and for others.
There's like a phrase for that. Oh, I know what it is.
Okay.
It's not, in an argument, it's not the husband against the wife or the boyfriend against the girlfriend. It's us against the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the mentality you need to have, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for
and
having
all
me.
your wisdom.
Well,
I think it's going to be very valuable. Is there anything else you want to say or leave us with?
No, I'm excited to be on, excited for you starting the podcast, and hopefully something I said was of value. So.
Maybe one or two things.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode of That's What He Said. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you're taking away something valuable that will benefit your dating life. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give this show a follow, rate, and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like this video, and most importantly, comment below because I want to hear what you said. See you next time. Thank you.